We are live on Myth Vision Podcast and Dr. Kip Davis YouTube channel with my friend Stephen Nelson, as well as Dr. Dale C. Allison Jr. So you have Dr. Kip Davis, Dr. Dale C. Allison Jr., Stephen Nelson, and of course, Myth Vision, Derek Lambert. I'm the host of Myth Vision. So what are we doing this stream for? Well, there's been all sorts of back and forth about the Gospel of Matthew. What is this author up to with the two donkey scene that we see in this gospel when it looks like Mark has one donkey? And there's this huge rabbit trail of discussions and responses online. It's like a dream within a dream within a dream kind of thing. And me and Kip have been going back and forth, and Stephen's been part of it. And of course, we've been referencing Dr. Dale C. Allison Jr.'s commentary with W.D. Davies, and I had to look down to make sure I didn't say J.W. Davies. I don't know why. I'm trying to make sure I had the name right. To discuss this matter, why not get the horse's mouth to tell us what's going on and what his thoughts are? So, Kip, where do you want to take us into first?
So maybe I will. I'll just start with a breakdown of my interest in this. As a scholar of the Hebrew Bible and of the Dead Sea Scrolls, with a casual interest in the New Testament, certainly an interest insofar as it addresses textual and historical concerns of first century Judaism. This is a question that attracted my attention by the very strong assertion made by a Christian apologist that this passage that Matthew quotes from Zechariah, and Zechariah 9 verse 9, is proof positive that Matthew was reading out of the Masoretic text, the Hebrew text of Zechariah, and he provided a pretty nonsensical word salad in order to arrive at that point about Matthew's lexical abilities. But this, as I'm sure everyone who's spent any amount of time with this passage, the point that the apologist was attempting to make was that Matthew knew what he was doing, and he wasn't being ridiculous or making this absurd situation out of what appears in Mark. And as I worked through this, I think I kept on coming back to what I think is the critical point. What is Matthew doing with this story, and why? And it seems certain to me that Matthew's primary motivation in retelling this story is to get two donkeys in there somehow, for some reason. I've got some of my own thoughts on that, and I'm sure we'll get into it. But I think this probably sets us up for what I look forward to in conversation over the course of the next hour.
And Dale, me and Kip might bounce back and forth. I was muted on what we think is going on. Some interesting ideas about Matthew. But do we want to start off by just recognizing? I think it's important to say that it sounds like Bart said multiple things, and let's give some credit where credit's due. Inspiring Philosophy, Michael Jones, who's been engaging us back and forth, coming from the apologist side, is hearing Bart kind of say two things. It sounds like he could be saying that there's a mistake. It doesn't seem he's taking it too seriously, and we're taking it more seriously than he is in this respect. And then the other side with my interview is that he's saying, well, I think Matthew was too smart and is doing something unique and different. But there's details that we want to get Dr. Allison on to get into some of the rabbit trail issues of Septuagint, what's going on. And I think it's important you go ahead and dive into a question and let Dr. Allison kind of tackle it with us.
Yeah, and before that,
Sure.
I want to chime in and just echo what Derek said. Like, my hat is off to Michael Jones, Inspiring Philosophy, for slam dunking on Bart Ehrman. I mean, he really got Bart Ehrman, who has built his career on a lot of very popular literature, you know, some of it on the scholarly side, some of it on the pop market side, where I don't recall exactly which book it's from, but he really takes a dig at this particular passage we're going to get into, seemingly unfairly, you know, poking fun at Matthew and insinuating that Matthew just didn't know what he was doing, and this is like ridiculous, and Jesus is riding two donkeys, and how he gets a laugh out of it. And this whole back and forth really cornered him, and he just admitted, yeah, you know what, personally, my beliefs have changed. I don't remember exactly how he phrased it, but he's pivoted on this. You know, you could say he's backpedaled. In obviously, Michael also respectfully backpedaled some of his hyperbole, you know, that he was woefully ignorant and all of that. But let's face it, like, you know, Ehrman has put out a public position that Matthew was just woefully ignorant of Hebrew parallelism. And now he has retreated, and I think Michael just scored a touchdown there. Like, bravo! Like, you guys got a real good point coming from, you know, a non-scholar, a non-professional researcher, which I fall into that category as well. And I'm going to defer to the experts from here on out. But I mean, that's inspiring to me, that like he could do that much homework and put all of it up there on screen. And I will quibble with a few details for sure. But hats off, brother. Like, that's great. You know, like, congratulations. And so that, you know, it's commendable. No objections?
Is that no?
That's it. That was all I wanted to say. That's just wanted to give props.
All right. Have a nice day, everybody. No, I'm just kidding. So, Kid, yeah, go ahead.
So I think there's several critical questions that we can get into. Certainly ones that I have interest in. What is primarily, what is Matthew doing with this story from the Gospel of Mark, and why? What does this story indicate to us, if anything, about Matthew's usage of Scripture and the text that he was drawing from, and why? And what can we learn from this? And I'd love to hear Dr. Allison weigh on this from a more from a broader appraisal of all of Matthew's writing. What do we know about the writer of this gospel and his familiarity with the Hebrew Bible, and his usage of it, and his sources, I guess, when it comes to reading and interpreting Scripture as he's telling a story about Jesus? So I don't know, Dr. Allison, maybe you could start by with that first question. What is going on in this text in Matthew chapter 21? What is Matthew doing with Mark, and why?
Okay, so first of all, God only knows. That's the honest answer. But I do have ideas as to what's going on here. So if we want to, we could come back to the question of, did Matthew know Hebrew? So first of all, I am convinced that he did know Hebrew. I may be wrong, but I'm convinced he did. I'm also convinced that he has something like, or akin to, a proto-rabbinic training of some sort, or at least at points he shows contact with a sort of Judaism that we know elsewhere only through the rabbis. So we can come back to that. It seems to me that when you're looking at Matthew compared to Mark, once in a while the changes are stylistic, and they just reflect a preference for this word or that phrase. But there are other times when Matthew is changing things for what I would call theological reasons. And I am sure, even if we're not sure of the explanation, that he has a motive here. I don't myself think he has any extra historical information like he's reading Mark, but he also knows, because Fred told him, that there were actually two donkeys. Even if there were two donkeys, why would you mention it? Who cares? There are so many details that are left out. So what you have to do, in my judgment, is you have to go exploring for a reason that Matthew would have changed this. Now, we'll come back to this maybe in a bit with regard to Hebrew parallelism, but it's simply the case that you can find all over rabbinic literature people who are not interpreting synonymous parallelism the way we do. Just absolutely not. In fact, there was a book written a few years ago on early rabbinic exegetical techniques that said something like interpreting synonymous parallelism in the early rabbinic sources is actually very rare. That is, they don't interpret it the way we do. They don't see synonymous parallelism. Their goal is actually to see two different things when you have what we think of as synonymous parallelism. So Matthew can, I think, given his hermeneutical world, look at Zechariah. He's moved from Mark to Zechariah. Mark is probably implicitly alluding to Zechariah. Matthew has gone to this text. And Matthew sees that there are possibly here two donkeys. So why does he want to make sure there are two donkeys? Well, in an earlier work, and I think in the commentary still, what I argued is that maybe he's thinking about Moses, because there's a scene in Exodus where Moses is associated with asses, plural, not with a singular donkey. But I've decided that I was probably wrong about this. I've been persuaded recently that the explanation is actually in the book of Genesis. So I have a Bible open here, and I'd like to read Genesis 49:11. So this is about the scepter not departing from Judah, and this is a messianic oracle in ancient Judaism. It certainly is for the rabbis. And it says, binding his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. Now, what's so interesting about this is you can get two donkeys out of this, and if you want to, you can actually get a male and female donkey out of the Hebrew. Now, that gets really complicated, but you can get a male and female, and that's actually what Matthew has. He doesn't just have two donkeys. He's got a male and female donkey. If you look at verse 2 carefully, he's got the donkey and then the colt with her, autes. So he's got two sexes here. The only place I know of where you can find two donkeys, right? Two donkeys in scripture, in some significant text where you can find, if you want, two sexes, is here. Now, what's so interesting to me is that Matthew and Mark both talk about the donkey being tethered or being tied. And again, it's one of those things, why on earth mention this? And the commentators down through the centuries say, well, this is a messianic oracle back here. This is about Judah. This is about the line of the rulers. And what's happening here is that this is the messianic donkey, and we're fulfilling scripture here. So if you look at the modern commentators on Mark, and you look at some of the early commentators, they are going not only to Zechariah, but to Genesis 49:11. And I think Matthew is reading Mark, and he's thinking, oh, this is Zechariah, but it's also Genesis 49:11, and he is reading two donkeys there. So I suspect that's what he's doing. Now, I don't think he's using the Septuagint here in 49:11, but he can think this because there's a messianic oracle that says for him this is the case. Let me reiterate again that this is not our hermeneutic. All right, we don't do this with texts. This is not what modern critical scholars do, and this is not even what modern apologists do. But Matthew is living in a world where you can mingle scriptures and put things together, and even, if you will, create events. There are other places in Matthew where he is frightfully creative with scripture in a way that reminds you of the rabbis.
Mhm.
So that's my take on things. You can find stories in Jewish literature where somebody has created an event out of what to us seems like a preposterous, close to preposterous reading of the Hebrew. One of my favorites is that in Genesis 19, there's the story of Abraham offering curds and milk and a calf to the three strangers. And the text says that he set this before them. He set the calf before him. And then it says, and then he stood up. Now, obviously, the guy who stands up is Abraham. But there was a legend that it was the calf that stood up. So you actually have in a first century text a story about the calf coming back to life. It was the calf that was fed to the three people, and then it stands up, it raises from the dead, it comes back to life. Nobody in the modern world would look at this text and say, oh yeah, the calf came back to life. But somebody back then thought, oh, this is neat. I can read it this way. And I think Matthew does things like that from time to time, which again, for me, is sort of proto-rabbinic.
Hmm.
I kind of want to ask and just point out along the way if we can throw some ideas in there, Kip, because I don't want to step on your toes. I know that you want to present something, at least this idea of Septuagint gearing closer towards Masoretic. There's definitely a gear toward that, but I don't want to lose track on that. Maybe get Allison's thoughts. And then Stephen, of course, I know you want to chime in with visuals. Just one comment I want to make, and I'd love to see people be less dogmatic about having to have the events described in this literature as if they have to have happened as they're being written here. If you want to play with memory or assume memory in some of this, go for it. I know that scholars do that, but there is a freedom, in a sense, a liberty in crafting narrative. And it sounds like this author is capable of doing that with a potential historical memory of Jesus entering into Jerusalem on a donkey, potentially, or it could be completely literary. The point is he has the freedom to kind of make the events conform to a literary model he finds within sacred scripture to fulfill those things. And I want to help people get out of the bubble of literalism in that sense, that it has to be exactly like it's being written here. Can you comment on that briefly?
You're asking me to comment on it?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
So from my point of view, as I guess I'm a scholar. So from my point of view, the sort of harmonization, over literal harmonization that people are accustomed to was simply demolished in the middle of the 19th century. So there was a great German scholar named David Friedrich Strauss who wrote this great large book on the critical life of Jesus. And one of the things he does throughout this is he looks at people trying to harmonize texts, right? So when Jesus heals a blind man in Mark, well, he heals two blind men in Matthew. And if you look at it in one of the texts, maybe it's two of the texts, he's doing this while he approaches the city, and another while he's exiting the city. There are little things like this everywhere in the Gospels. And so what this means is, however you want to explain it or whatever you want to do with it theologically, is that these writers cannot be harmonized in detail, right? Maybe you want to say you can harmonize the gist of the stories together, but they are disagreeing in little details at every turn. And that's why the genealogy that I belong to just doesn't engage in harmonization anymore. We just say people once upon a time they did that, and that's not what we're doing anymore. When I worked through Matthew and wrote a commentary on Matthew, I was able to go word by word through Matthew and Mark. And sometimes, as I said, Matthew is changing things stylistically, but he's often changing tiny little things for theological reasons, right? He just is. He has Jesus go up on a mountain to deliver the Sermon on the Mount. There's no mountain in Luke. There's no mountain in Q. There's no mountain right there in Mark. he wants Jesus to be his Mosaic figure, and there was a tradition about Moses sitting on Sinai. So I'm sure that's what's going on here, and he doesn't mind doing this. He just does it, right?
Thank you so much.
Hmm. One of the things that that I find kind of interesting, and this is maybe this is just me, but when I look at Matthew's quotation of Zechariah 9:9, and it's pretty complex and it's involved.
Yeah.
Just sort of to to lay this out there for the audience. He starts with a conflation, right?
Mhm.
It's Isaiah 61, I believe, that he begins with. The daughters of
62:11.
Jerusalem,
60.
62:11. Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, I'm terrible with the numbers. I get them mixed up all the
Oh,
time
me
when I'm
me
trying to
too. I
pull
just
them
have it in front of
up.
me. That's
Nice. So he starts with that, and then he's got what I see as a strictly verbatim quotation from the Septuagint text, the one that we have, right? And then
Mhm.
it's that last line that looks just completely different. When something that strikes me when I look at the Hebrew version compared to the Greek version of this particular passage is that when I read the Greek, that sounds more to from my perspective, the way the Greek translator has rendered the last line, the last of the colon, the parallelisms, uh seems to me that that could lend itself maybe even a little more naturally to the presence of there being two donkeys as opposed to the parallel. And I don't know, I think some of that might just be with my overt sensitivity to seeing parallelisms within Hebrew poetic texts like that. But I yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or
Well, so my way to approach this is not to view this text in isolation. So long time ago, many years ago, and I couldn't give
it's
you any of
probably
the
my
details,
error.
any of the details now, is that I went through all of the quotations in Matthew, all of them, and all of the clear allusions, all of the clear allusions and the citations and quotations. And I compared them all to the Masoretic text, our standard Hebrew, and to the standard Septuagint, and also to the Targums, to the Targumim. And what
Mm,
I found is, well, of course, it's a Greek text, that there's an awful lot of agreement with the Septuagint, but maybe more often than you might think, there is agreement with the so-called Masoretic text against the Septuagint, and there are some occasions where Matthew agrees with the Targums and not the Septuagint or the Masoretic text. Now, there are a couple of ways of thinking about this. One is simply to say, well, the Septuagint that we have obviously wasn't the only Greek text circulating in antiquity. And there were Greek texts, as we know from the scrolls, as you know better than I do,
mhm.
Hebrew texts that agree with the Septuagint against the Masoretic text, right? So
Many.
maybe what's going on in Matthew is he simply has a very different Greek text, and it happens at many points to agree with the Masoretic text. Yeah, against our Septuagint. I'm not sure how that helps you with the Targums, which they're Aramaic and they're a little later and so on. But what happened to me is I decided, well, I've got two options here. Matthew knows more than one textual tradition. He's bilingual, or maybe even trilingual,
Mhm.
or he's just got a Greek text that's very different from ours. And what I finally decided is that Matthew was like the author of Revelation. So if you know Greek well, and if you know Hebrew, and if you read Revelation, I think it's obvious that the author is writing horrible Greek. And it's because he's thinking in another language. He's thinking in Hebrew. There's just so many places where you can see Hebrew or Aramaic behind the Greek of Revelation. So he's a terrible writer. He doesn't know Greek. It's got to be a second language. I think, well, if there's somebody else in the first century belonging to the so-called Christian community who is bilingual, right? Well, then Matthew could be bilingual. It's just that his Greek is better than it's not great, but it's certainly better than the guy who wrote Revelation, who really had trouble writing Greek. And then I moved from there to think, well, there are these really interesting, striking parallels between Matthew and the rabbis. You know, Matthew is the one who has kingdom of heaven. That's not anywhere else in the earliest Christian text, but it's a very common rabbinic phrase, you know, the kingdom of the heavens. Or Matthew likes the Father who is in the heavens. Again, a phrase that the rabbis like, which you can find in many rabbinic texts, but it's not so common in the early Christian literature. What really does it for me is that if you look at the parallelism in sayings of Jesus in Mark and compare them to Matthew, compare them to Mark and Luke, Matthew again and again and again has a statement which is in perfect antithetical parallelism. Don't store your treasure up on earth where, but store your treasure up in heaven where. Wow. And it's word for word the same with negations stuck in them. This is not a Greek way of writing. In fact, the closest parallels to this, to my knowledge, are in rabbinic literature. In Mishnah Avot, you've got lots of these sentences which are just like these sentences in Matthew. Perfect parallelism with negations stuck in. So, you know, there's no slam dunk argument here, but I keep adding things up and I finally think, okay, this guy probably did know Hebrew. And then I paid no attention to any of this that you guys have been paying attention to. I don't know anything about this debate.
Right.
I don't know how I'm being used. I don't know anything.
Clean slate.
But I do know that the rabbis just didn't care about synonymous parallelism, or at least the earliest rabbis. They just don't. Yep. And I've come to the conclusion independently that Matthew has some context with some kind of proto-rabbinic something or other. So it makes me think he didn't care about parallelism either.
Can I ask for a clarification? If they don't care about it, does that mean they're not aware of it?
Well, I wrote down a couple of things here. You tell me what the answer is. I don't know. So how about this? This is actually Genesis 40:49. So he washes his garments in wine and his robe in the blood of grapes. Now we all say, okay, that's beautiful poetics and, you know, synonymous parallelism. Here's Genesis Rabbah. This is a late rabbinic text. Yeah. The first clause means wine will abound in his territory. The second clause means if they err on the law, it will be rectified in his territory. Yeah. They have nothing to do with each other. Is it totally different? Right? Yeah. So are you asking me, did they know this? If I had to guess, I would guess that these people really thought that the Hebrew text was God-breathed. It was given by God, and you had to find meaning in everything. And why would God be redundant? Yeah. Why would God be redundant? Why would God say the same thing twice? So there must be meaning here. I also found this lovely thing. This is Psalm 2:3. Found this yesterday thinking about what I might talk about today. Let us break their chains and cast away their cords. Let us break their chains and cast away their cords. This is a rabbinic interpretation. Let us break their chains. Those are the tefillin on the hand. And cast away their cords. These are the tefillin on the head.
Nice.
Come on.
You know,
go ahead, Kate.
I was going to say, I think what maybe one of the more illustrative situations of how Jewish writers were handling this question can be found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, where we have Pesharim that are unpacking, mining the scriptures in this sense, and doing exactly the same thing, where every single word, every single phrase, every sentence is pregnant with meaning. So in this context, you ignore the parallels in favor of isolating them to mean different things. But then you have a whole bunch of other texts, poetic texts, presumably written, collected by the same people, where they're also engaging in continuing the same style of Hebrew poetry. So obviously they understand how this works, right? They're operating on another level. They're operating on multiple levels when it comes to reading these texts.
If I may chime in on this, Kip, this is an important point that Cattell Bartholow highlights in her book Jews and Their Roman Rivals, which got like it was nominated for an award. It was really, really well written. And she highlights pagan Rome and its influence on Jews. And she documents this and goes through a little history leading up to the point. And me and Stephen went down this nerdy path of trying to discover who are the Goyim, the Gentiles, the ethne. What is this ethnos, ethne, like diving into the identity and noticing how Paul uses scripture. And we talked to Christopher D. Stanley. We dove deep into his book. I mean, we went down this rabbit trail to discover
like a 2-year research project, just nerding out.
Wow.
Exactly. And like I'm so thankful that I nerded out in this, what would be an obscure and not even interesting topic, because it really helps me understand what's going on when Paul says, it is written, you shouldn't muzzle an ox. And it's like, we know that's an actual ox, but he does not mean an ox. He's talking about himself. And notice that the living scripture to them gets reapplied to the contextual situation they're going through, or at least what they're trying to paint in their contemporary times. It seems this is what Matthew might be doing, what many of the rabbis are doing when they talk about Tephilim, or they're talking about what's in front of them. What's their world look like? The scriptures are alive for them then, so they're reinterpreting, recontextualizing it for that. And so, whether or not, I don't know if we can say Matthew knew the actual original context and its purpose and its real meaning and these literary examples or, parallelisms and stuff. I don't think it mattered, is the point. I think it's more about this living scripture and how they're applying it to their contemporary situation and their audience.
It's really hard. It's really hard to get back to this mentality that isn't our mentality. But, sometimes when I'm thinking about Origen and looking at things Origen did know, the Hebrew text, and he knew several Greek texts, and, he produced this great book with parallel columns. I think he may have thought that all of the different translations were somehow inspired and that God was speaking through multiple texts, even if they're not saying the same thing. So, that would never occur to me, but I've been reading Origen at times and thought, is he really thinking this? That, the Greek is inspired and the Hebrew's inspired, and they're saying different things, so they're both true in their own way. That's just really strange for me. But if Origen, he's a genius, right? And so learned, and by the way, did study with some rabbis at one point so he could learn Hebrew. If he could do this, then things are just so different.
Yeah.
Back then, just really different.
Yeah, and Derek, so if you could pull up the last image I sent you of the timeline, I have a question that I'd like to pose to both, Dr. Kip, Dr. Allison, regarding the Septuagint and the comment that was made. I don't think, hopefully this is somewhat legible. And shameless plug, this is on my Bible study website that I'm developing called crossbible.com. So you can explore this. It's a work in progress. I've been gathering feedback. I got some feedback from Kip on the Dead Sea Scrolls aspect of it. This is thank you.
I'm excited about this, Stephen.
Same.
I got to throw that out there.
Yeah, just go play with it, and get in touch with me if you find anything wrong with it. But the timeline of the Bible spans the whole history of the transmission of the text in the Old Testament and the New Testament. This is just the top right corner snapshot of this huge timeline that I've been working on for like a decade.
Top left, but yeah.
Yeah. So top left. So the purpose here is to show, based on my study of Emmanuel Tov, mainly for textual criticism of the Hebrew Bible, that there are really parallel traditions going on in, early, Second Temple Judaism and in the early church, where there was originally a vorlag, or however you're going to pronounce it, of the Septuagint that was in Hebrew, that is mostly lost and was partially recovered in some manuscripts in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And you can see here that, there's represented here is the Old Greek Septuagint expansion, where they got more than just the Septuagint, more than just the Pentateuch. And this is, 2nd century BC. And by the 1st century, as the Proto-Masoretic text begins to become the dominant form, at least in the pre-rabbinical Pharisaic tradition, you start getting revisions that are called the Kaige Theodosian revision, which are two separate sort of conflated traditions that we only have fragments of. We only have hints that this existed. We don't have like an actual copy of it. But Kaige Theodosian, thank you. Aquila, Symmachus, and the list goes on if you expand the timeline. But I'm just focused here on the first, like the 1st century BC, 1st century AD. It was in this back and forth. I think Stephen Boyce mentioned this, that reaching for the hypothesis that Matthew may have had a Greek version that differed from the Greek versions that have come to us today, the critical editions of the Septuagint, as Dr. Allison affirmed, that is somehow very implausible. Like, you're reaching really far for that hypothesis, because we have, I think, quote unquote, I don't know if this was the exact quote, we have no evidence for that there's no evidence that in the 1st century or the 2nd century AD, that the author of Matthew would have had access to some now lost version of the Greek. And I just want to illustrate with this timeline that clearly there were at least 4, if not more, emerging standards of Greek recensions of the Greek Septuagint that were already making adjustments to agree with the Hebrew Masoretic the Proto-Masoretic text, or the Masoretic text family. And my question is, if we find a quotation in the New Testament anywhere, not just in Matthew, is Emmanuel Tove correct in postulating that we have no way to determine if the author was actually directly translating from Hebrew, or if it's just going through some Greek intermediary translation that was already aligned with the Hebrew text? Can we really identify these two categories where it's like, that's a Masoretic quotation and that's a Septuagint translation, and it's like a really clear line? I don't think so, but I'm open to my mind being changed, because I think, other than the author of Revelation, I think all these other authors are very Hellenized, very well versed in Greek, and so I'm just wondering, like, what would convince me that they're just straight up translating from Hebrew? That was really at the heart of the debate for me, and the reason I was chiming in and participating in this discussion, because it is the topic that has inspired me to start this Bible reading website.
So maybe.
That's it.
Maybe I can supplement that a little bit, and I don't know what you want to do with this in terms of your chart, Stephen, but one of the things that was discovered in the Judean desert were not just Hebrew texts. There are Greek translations, not many, but there are a handful of Greek translations of Scripture in the Qumran caves. There is also a pretty extensive Greek translation of the Minor Prophets that was discovered at Nachal Hever. One of the things, it's quite interesting, and this sort of this sort of frustrated me earlier in my work in the Dead Sea Scrolls as I was investigating text types. The term Septuagint, or Septuagint-like, when it's applied to the manuscripts of the Judean desert, tends to get used in two different ways. One way is to identify texts that look close to what we find in the Septuagint as like a forlaga or forlagan. These would be like, we have Hebrew manuscripts of Jeremiah or Exodus or 1 Samuel, for example, that appear definitely much closer to versions of those texts that were translated and incorporated into our collection as the Septuagint. But then the other thing that the original editors of the scrolls did was, whenever they encountered a Greek translation of Scripture, they also identified that as Septuagint. Now, problematically, is that when you investigate these texts, what you do discover is a high number of them are quite different from the Greek Septuagint text that we have, and actually range a lot closer to a more literal translation of the Masoretic text, the Hebrew Masoretic text that we have. So, and I, I was there when I saw Stephen Boyce make this claim, this comment about how we don't, and his specific point was with regards to this particular text from Zechariah 9 verse 9, we don't have an extant Greek translation that matches the Hebrew text, and he's right about that.
And just
But
to
what
add
we
to that,
do have,
I was going to add just
Sorry.
a point of how he tried to explain the problem, where he thought he had a Greek text here and he's speaking to a certain audience, and then he's almost like pulling out the Hebrew text and then he's speaking to another audience, and it was like too much, I think, going on there. But go ahead, Kip. Sorry.
Now he said a few things to in since then. Like I know that Stephen posits that Matthew was originally writing in Hebrew, and that he had Hebrew, all of his texts, all of his scriptures were Hebrew texts originally.
I think he said that,
but then
if there was a Q, it was that Hebrew document. I think he
something
went as
like
far as
that.
that. I could be remembering.
So we're getting a bit far afield here, but I the point I wanted to make was, while we don't have Zechariah, we don't have this version of Zechariah in Greek, what we do have are these numerous other fragments from the period which exhibit a much more literal translation of the Masoretic text. So, and that's, it seems to be, I know Tove has made this point, that there seems to be a movement in first century Judaism towards trying to bring a bunch of these Greek translations closer to something that was looking more and more like, I guess, a standardized version of the Hebrew text. So that's all I got on that.
Dr. Allison, I'm dying to hear what you have to say.
Well, look, I'm just being cautious here. So what I said earlier was, when I went through and I noticed that lots of texts in Matthew matched the Masoretic text, and some matched the Septuagint, and some matched the Targums, I didn't conclude from that alone that Matthew knew Hebrew. This just raises the possibility, because I don't know. Nobody knows in detail the textual tradition from the first century. We just don't have access to these sorts of things. That's why I said that it's important to me that I can infer the likelihood that Matthew knew Hebrew on other grounds, right? For other reasons. And I think I can do that. So I'm trying to be cautious here.
Okay.
Well, and I read in the commentary. I read in the commentary also. I went through the pertinent sections, and it seemed like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like some of the arguments for Matthew's potentially being fluent in Hebrew is the sort of Semitic flavor of his Greek, and that just makes me wonder. Because there are examples in modern day Jewish communities where people use Yiddish terms, like, oh, I was schlepping this heavy bag and I was schwitzing, and they may not actually be fluent in Yiddish or be able to translate from Yiddish, but it's just in their milieu, it's in their environment.
Yeah. Well, this is just an old problem. What do you do with the Semitisms, so-called, of Mark? What do you do with the Semitisms of Luke? Some people have thought, well, Luke might have been bilingual, or Mark's getting traditions that have been translated before him, and so on. So. Yeah, look, you have to be humble here. You have to be modest. And look, there are multiple things. I've shared several things. Also, it's important to me that in my view, Matthew actually begins the gospel with what the rabbis called gematria. So the name David, according to one way of writing it in Hebrew, is 14. That is the numerical value. There are two ways of writing David, but one of them is 14. And David is mentioned at the beginning and the middle and the end of this genealogy, and he's in 14th place. I could go on, but I am pretty sure that Matthew is playing with the Hebrew value of the name David. Now, we have Greek texts where authors use gematria, like the Sibylline oracles, but it's Greek gematria. This is a Greek text, which is like Revelation, and it's 666, which is Kaiser Nero in Hebrew. I have no doubt about this at all.
Me neither.
Amazing.
And Matthew is writing a Greek text, but it's got some Hebrew gematria, I think, in it. So again, that's the sort of thing.
That's much stronger.
But I add them up, and I think, yeah, this guy is like John the seer, the apocalypse writer.
Okay.
I did want to make one comment, and then we can get to an interesting synopsis, plug in Cross Bible again. And that is the doublets, like over and over. You got 2 donkeys, 2 demoniacs. And I love your commentary in the section, just for those who haven't got your commentary, they really should, on Matthew. It's 3 volumes. So, if you need a doorstop or 2, it's good. It's huge. So
you can, unlike Gary Habermas's book, it works for more than just a doorstop.
Exactly.
Sorry,
Sorry, we had to. Forgive us. Now, the double Jesuses in the manuscript tradition, I had Stephen do a little deep dive. This was poetic and interesting to me, how Matthew has Jesus Barabbas, and it seems there's no textual tradition that we've discovered outside of Matthew that has Jesus Barabbas, which is, like you say,
son of the Father. Yeah.
And then you have Jesus, the Son of God, right? So this is very poetic, sounds crafted in a literary sense, which seems common sense to you. But that over and over doubling up things, going out of your way to make 2 Jesuses when it was just Barabbas and Mark, sounds like a purposeful action. And is there good reason to think this is what rabbis are doing, or is this a literary motif that we could find that's prevalent?
Yeah. So I have notes. I was taking notes for years on multiplying by 2. I was going to write an article called Multiplying by 2. And you're right. Matthew does this several times, but I've never figured out what exactly is going on. So I gave up and I quit keeping notes. So I don't know. Bultmann thought he called it a folklore motif. He just says folklore likes to double things. Well, he didn't give many examples. I have no idea. This is probably a subject somebody should look into, but I gave it up years ago. I just couldn't figure it out.
Thank you for that answer. Stephen, what do you want me to do here?
If you could pull up the synopsis, it's another, shameful plug for crossbible.com. This is a mock-up. It's a feature I'm working on that will allow users to sort of interact with the Gospels in parallels, trying to implement some kind of color coding for it in any language, any version. This is a custom translation, and I previously, just the first image.
Yeah.
So I gave Kip a prior draft of this. If you could go down to the bottom and just show the verses. So the version I gave to Kip, as he pointed out, just there you go. So a little higher. So Kip, the version I gave you before had some errors. So there may be some errors in this too, because I was doing it very fast, but I'm comparing it to the Greek. And the reason I use my custom translation is because if I use any standard translation, it just doesn't get the right word order to line up. So I can illustrate this point here. But the point that Kip made, based on my other previous example that was more error prone, is that if you accept that Matthew is using Mark as a source here, and he's starting with Mark as his basis, and Mark has just 1 donkey, and it's just 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and you can see here in the color coding, and I'm bolding things and underlining. Matthew is not only getting the second donkey in there, he is specifically saying, and the black formatting means that it's unique to this gospel. He's saying this took place. They got both of these donkeys to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet, that behold, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey and on a colt. He's mounted on both of them. Now, what that means exactly, the mechanics of it, I know this really bothers some people, and it's been the subject of this whole debate that Mike Jones said he's calling Donkey Gate, and it's hilarious. The only point
I'm pretty sure I actually think Derek came up with that term. But...
No, Stephen, me and
did he?
behind the scenes kind of brushed shoulders.
Well, my point is that I think it's very short-sighted to fall back on the apologetic that I've been hearing across the board on in that camp is that Jesus obviously sat on the cloaks, right? Because if you look at Mark, I mean, the cloaks are on two animals. That was Ehrman's retort. But if you look at Mark, the closest antecedent is still the cloaks. So he sat down on it. So grammatically, you have to trace that it. You can see it at the bottom there, over the cloaks, to say it. And all Matthew is doing in the Greek here is he's saying, he's changing it to afton, then. So he sat on them. In my mind, just grammatically, having like gone cross-eyed looking at this in the Greek, I just don't see any other way for him to sit on the cloaks. He's mounting the donkeys to fulfill what was written, that the Messiah would be mounted on both the donkey and the colt. How mechanically that works, whether or not he was sort of side saddled and maybe leaning on one or had his feet on the other, I don't think the author particularly cared too much about how it happened. I don't think he's straddling two donkeys. I don't think it's inherently ridiculous. And the fallback has been, they've been reaching for examples from Homer with that involve chariots, where they mount horses and they're actually getting on a chariot. I think it's conceivable, just based on this analysis that I put here, that he is mounting, he is sitting, not necessarily riding, but you can infer that. He's sitting on them, the donkeys that are covered in the cloaks. It's all plural, the antecedent is plural, and that may be a figure of speech to mean that he's somehow situating himself on one, but there's the other one there. And I just don't think that it's necessarily like a full, like it has to be the cloaks, like that common sense demands that it be the cloaks. I don't think he was too concerned about common sense. That's my spiel on that.
What do you think, Dale?
So my response to that is that he wants, if I'm right, he wants to pull this messianic oracle in from Genesis 49. And he's thinking textually. He's not thinking visually. All right. He's thinking textually. He's not thinking visually. You end up with these questions because of the way he wrote his text, that, is Jesus a trick writer, or, what's going on? But I just don't think it occurs to him that he's created a problem here. By the way, I should add, I earlier thought that maybe there was a connection with Moses. And then I suggested today Genesis 49. I said I had been convinced of this. I should call attention to the name of the person who convinced me of this. So there's a New Testament scholar named Tucker Ferda, F-E-R-D-A, and he wrote an article a number of years ago, and I read it. And his argument was, among other things, Allison's wrong about this, and here's a better solution. And I read it and I thought, yeah, he's right. This is probably as close as we're ever going to come.
You mean you actually change your mind based on new evidence? Like, wow.
Brilliant. Yeah.
We love you, Dale.
Anyway, I just wanted to give him credit for that. Okay. Because it's not, I don't want to leave the impression that's something I just thought of. And okay.
Stephen, we are at the end of the hour here, and I've got a few more minutes. I'd like to see if we can get through some of these super chats, because people pay good money, and I
can stick around.
Yeah, we can stick around after Dale's gone if that's fine. I just really want to make sure some of the ones that have Dale's name on them are there.
Yep.
And these are super chats between my channel and Kip's. So Autumn Joy, thank you for becoming a member, and Jesus on Trial as well. Thank you both for being members. Gnostic Informant says, Stephen F., what would you say is the most misleading position that English-speaking laymen make when assessing Greek passages in the New Testament, and why?
Just that everything cleanly maps onto English. I mean, I don't know if you don't know the Greek, you kind of just gotta like get some help. But I would just say one thing. Kip mentioned in his previous stream, I think there's a little hyperbole about the pain involved in learning the original languages, and you have to struggle for years. I get it. I've also suffered some pain, but I just want to reassure everyone, if you do want to learn the biblical languages, it's pretty, there is a painless process you can go through. Biblingo is a great platform you can use. Don't be afraid. Don't let Kip scare you. You can, a little goes a long way. And I would encourage as many people that are interested, like I'm going to be launching Greek courses on my platform on crossbible.com. So, and I've been giving Greek lessons to both Derek and to Neil, Gnostic Informant. So I'm happy to get in touch with me if you want some Greek lessons or at least some advice, because it's a passion of mine.
Thank you. Hard Work says, Dr. Allison, you are a legend. Thank you for giving us your time. Thank you. Thank you all for digging into these details. And of course, the legend's not going to say that about himself. It's us who create the apotheosis. Thank you, Dale, for being here. Doc Pleuromonot says, could Papias be referring to a lost source for his assumed Aramaic predecessor for Matthew? Perhaps his logion was more like a testimonium or prophetic proof text that was integrated? Thoughts on these oracles?
Well, that's a big question. I don't have a lot of time left. But the truth is that some scholars have thought this. So Helmut Kester thought this. T.W. Manson, very different scholar, thought this. So Papias refers to the logia, and usually that does refer to sayings more often than not. And so the idea is that maybe, by the way, this goes back to Schleiermacher of all things. The idea is that one of Matthew's sources, maybe Q or some part of Q, comes back to Matthew. And I thought if this is true, it would explain the title. So the analogy for this is always the book of Isaiah. So first Isaiah has some oracles that go back to the prophet Isaiah, but it's been expanded, right? And then second Isaiah has been stuck on, and third Isaiah has been stuck on. But the title of the book is not Isaiah and a bunch of other people. That is, you keep the title, even though people keep adding to the original. So that would be a parallel to this. You can't prove it, but it's a rather neat hypothesis. And it's a way of getting, of explaining Papias. And once Q's disappeared, it's just going to be understood as referring to Matthew. Maybe Papias understood it that way. But there are parts of Q. I once did the nerdy work on this. There are parts of Q that pass the translation threshold. That is, if you run them through the old books, I forget his name right now, wrote these books on Semitic interference in Greek texts. There are portions that satisfy the Greek translation criteria. So it's possible. It's a neat idea. I wish I knew.
Okay, I've got to go to different super chats that address you, and then is it okay if I get there's only a couple more? Is that something we could do, Dale? I know you have to be somewhere. Okay, sure. If you're okay with it. If not, everybody, it's not my fault.
Put a cap and gown on here in a few minutes and run over somebody's big celebration. Anyway, okay.
Or fast here. Stop scamming, man. And I'm just addressing ones to you. Do you think the Epistle of James borrows from Matthew or vice versa?
I'm one of the only people on the planet who thinks that James was written in the early 2nd century and knows Matthew. I think James is borrowing from Matthew.
Thank you.
Cool.
Dr. Allison, I respect your gangsta more than you know. What is your thoughts on Eusebius using Gentile sources to argue they point to Jesus in
preparation for the gospel?
Yeah.
Well, if you're asking me theologically, no, I don't think so, but I think it's really fun and interesting. So, I mean, if you're asking me metaphysically, are the pagans somehow prophesying Jesus in the way C.S. Lewis thought? Probably not, but that's a fantastic collection of stuff worth looking at. The more interesting part of that to me is the stuff with the Jewish scriptures. But it's 4 o'clock. I need to take off.
Okay.
One more thing.
Dr. Allison, last one, and then we'll let you go, and we're going to hang out. John Doe, Dr. Allison, thoughts on Matthew Galilee narrative versus Luke's Jerusalem narrative in the resurrection account? Contradiction, harmony, different theology?
Contradiction and different theology. They're both. So my own guess is that the original appearances were in Galilee, and then the disciples went back to Jerusalem, and there were probably additional appearances there. And Luke wants everything in Jerusalem. That's just the way he wants to work things. His gospel starts there, it ends there. Acts starts in Jerusalem. He wants it there. Galilee doesn't fit his scheme. So I think Luke is secondary there. I think Matthew, who is in line with what's implied in Mark, is original.
Dr. Allison, the legend, ladies and gentlemen, get the commentaries.
Thank you very much.
Hey, we should do a follow-up. Thank you, Dale.
Take care. Bye-bye.
You too.
Bye.
All right, he's awesome. I really knew before we started the stream, guys, just so you know, he was telling me I had a strict, strong cutoff, and I did not want to disrespect his time. So I had to skip super chats. Forgive me. I usually go in chronological order. So
We'll get them, though.
Do we want to chip these away and then have our free conversation?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I'm really looking forward to it. I hope people viewing will check out Cross Bible as well. You can also help Stephen out if you're really wanting to get into the facts, what the data is, what the sources say, and play around in the Bible to really get. I'm telling you, this is new and unique. There's nothing out there like it. It's your super chat here.
Woo!
Yeah.
Kevo Blob. Thank you for the stream. We'll catch up on it after. Thanks so much for the Swedish kroners. Much appreciated.
I'll just, whenever it's yours, I'll let you read them too.
Okay. All right. I think this one is
yours.
mine too, isn't it? Yeah. How fluid is the Dead Sea Scrolls text and Old Testament text in the past? Do you all agree it's major fluid? Only biblical text. How fluid is the text? Is the Septuagint also fluid and corrupted? How crazy the fluidity of the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible text. I mean, yeah, there is a lot there. I've talked about this a few times. I've addressed some of this in my Dead Sea Scrolls Unapologetically series here on YouTube, but and I have continuing evolving thoughts about this as well. You know, one of the problems that we encounter when attempting to assess the quote unquote biblical text, the text of scripture in the first century, is the ways in which scholars have in the past classified the documents. And part of this is just a matter of practicality. Scholars were sorting through hundreds and hundreds of fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls and just trying to figure out what these are and where they belong. So anything that they recognized as, you know, quote unquote Bible, they just designated it as Bible. This started to become a problem when they encountered an increasing number of fragments that looked an awful lot like Bible, but were pretty different from what survives in our text. So what we really have here in the first century is like a spectrum of texts where you have a number of texts that look very, very close to the versions that have survived, those being the Septuagint, the Masoretic text, the Samaritan Pentateuch. Then you've got a whole bunch of other fragments, other manuscripts that vary from these three, you know, in a few places, and then very dramatically to the point where you're looking at an entirely different text altogether. This has prompted a number of scholars, such as myself, to suggest pretty strongly that in the first century, you've got a highly fluid text of scripture. You've got various competing versions of scripture, which are being collected by individual Jewish communities. And what we end up with in the post-temple period, and then leading into the medieval period, is really more an accident of history than it is a promotion of authority or stability of the text from an earlier period. But thank you very much for the generous super chat. I hope that helps to address some of your questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I also another shameless plug. So my second, so if Derek links my website and the YouTube channel, the Cross Bible YouTube channel in the description. My next video that I'm working on, which Kip also weighed in and vetted the information on, is going to be very heavily focused on the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint, and that very question is going to be discussed in that next video. So like and subscribe for more on my end, on my YouTube channel. They're just starting now, so.
I will definitely link that. I didn't add it to the description yet, but we will make that happen.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. Stop Scamming Man says, ironic, Matthew says things like, if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. Yet also, cast not pearls before swine. Thank you, Stop Scamming Man. Then that was the next super chat, which we talked about. He thinks James is 2nd century. Gnostic informant, Dr. Kip, what is your thoughts on the use of the name? The
Yahoo.
name. Okay, Yahoo in Dead Sea Scrolls manuscripts, and do you think it could have been removed from Christian Bibles for theological reasons?
I've not really thought through the second part of that question, Neil. I think this is a reflection, and I also need to go back and look and see. I know there's a number of Greek fragments where the name is preserved. For those who don't know, Iao is the form of the Tetragrammaton of the name Yahweh as it appears in the Hebrew Bible that survives in a number of the Greek translations of the Hebrew Bible from the mid to late Second Temple period. I have to go back and look at how it appears in a number of these, specifically Greek fragments from Qumran. I off the top of my head, I don't remember, but I'll take a look at that. So I think that this is a reflection of a very common and a probably quite an ancient way of vocalizing the divine name, Yahweh. I'm not necessarily sold on this being the oldest way of vocalizing the name, but I would say that this is prominent in the period. And I have no thoughts on whether or not it was removed from Christian Bibles for theological reasons. We do have, yeah, I have to be careful about that because I don't know the manuscript evidence well enough really to comment on what that looks like clearly enough, far enough back, I think, to make any comments on what Christians were doing or not doing.
And if I
with
recall,
the
Neil's
name.
interest in this is that it also is an epithet of Dionysus, this conflation of Sabaoth and the Phrygian god Savasios. So there's interest there because it happens to be the exact same 3 letters that refer to. So if there were theological reasons to remove it, it may have been a recognition of the fact that some Greek speakers may think this is too close to Dionysus. We need to
see
clean this up a little bit.
Certainly makes sense in that direction, right? But we have the sad thing about Septuagint studies is the fact that our manuscript evidence tends to be pretty poor. We have very little that actually goes back into the certainly the Roman period. All we have are bits and pieces and little fragments. Hopefully, I mean the more that gets published from the Oxyrhynchus collection, the better. We'll definitely see this library, increasing in size. There will be more data to draw from, but it's one of those things. A good friend of mine, and Neil, if you haven't already, I suspect you probably have, but if you haven't already, you should look up the work of Anthony Meyer. He's a good friend of mine. He did his PhD dissertation on this question of the usage of Iao in the manuscript tradition of I'll say the Septuagint, as shorthand for the Greek translations of the Hebrew Bible. But yeah, if you haven't already, you should check out what Anthony's written about this.
Thank you. Stop Scamming Man says, I'm sure the main weakness for many aspiring scholars is their lack of knowledge of the languages. Have you any tips for these people?
For aspiring scholars, well, I guess if you're an aspiring scholar, then yeah, you need to keep learning. the languages, and you need to set a strong focus there. Um, one of the things that I guess I would also say is that when delving into the question of the languages and their usage, if you're not if you don't know them relatively well, just be careful with the arguments that you're employing, or the ideas that you're latching onto in terms of what's happening
I have a
within the
strong
text.
concordance. I don't have to do that, Kip.
Yeah. So can I just? I'll just tell you guys a story. Before I started taking biblical languages, I was actually training for pastoral ministries. So I was already preaching sermons before I knew a word of Hebrew or Greek. And in those early days, I always had a fascination with the languages and hadn't got around to learning them yet. But this is I preached some fiery sermons using my Strong's Concordance, and without having any sense or understanding of how the languages actually worked, what conjugations even meant with regards to verbal forms, and how that can dramatically affect the meanings of words. I preached some pretty creative sermons. Some totally wrong sermons, but very creative.
Thank you so much, man. Okay, the next one I think is this one. Stop scamming, man. Unlike Mark and Luke, which say the women went to Jesus's tomb with spices, Matthew simply says they went to visit the tomb. Is the idea of women going to anoint a body with spice after days fishy? Like, I guess this would be a question of like, what are the burial practices?
Jewish burial practices.
Right.
Or what was the motivation to change it? Like, it's
right.
kind of, yeah.
That's an
So
interesting
Mark and
question.
Luke. Yeah, in terms of the theological motivation for the change, or I by default, I have a tendency to assume theological changes when I see them within lots of the gospels. So that, yeah, whatever the change is,
there's probably something underneath.
I don't know. But yeah. Sorry,
interesting question.
I have no idea.
Maybe we can.
Is the idea when I'm going to anoint the body with spice after days fishy?
This might have been one while Allison was literally about to leave too, and I'm sure he would have had something to say about it. But I'm not going to call him on the phone right now. He'd be like, "Are you harassing me now?"
We're all woefully ignorant.
Like, one of the things here too, I think maybe this is helpful clarification, is it's not days after, right? Like the removal of the body, if you're going with the classic timeline, the removal of the body from the cross would have happened on Friday, right before Sabbath starts, and the women would have waited until the end of the Sabbath before going to the tomb anyways, on the basis of what's the accepted timeline, and what Jewish burial customs would have been. So I don't think that's fishy. It would have been, probably, if this is something that actually happened, it would have been like maybe just a little bit more than a 24-hour period. So it's I don't know enough about dead bodies to comment on the feasibility of this, but this doesn't strike me as a particularly vexing problem.
Okay, thank you so much. Hard work has popped up in two places, like those dual donkeys, and so I need to emphasize both super chats here. Stephen, can you give an ETA on when offer the Greek classes you talked about? Hold on.
I would.
Stephen, do you have an ETA? More or less you can give, and then you'll offer the Greek classes. And that's
Well,
good.
if you reach out at stephenacrossbible.com, we can schedule something if you want one-on-ones before I release the classes, because I'm always open to that. I love doing that. I love meeting people who are potential like early adopters and people who share, a passion for the Bible. But I would say that, get on the mailing list. The more I can build that up, the more I can show it to like potential investors and people who might be able to get on board and help me just build the platform, because I intend on using the platform for the Greek classes. So it's kind of like a chicken or the egg thing. So I would say by the end of this year, I'm working on the format and the structure of how I'm going to do the classes. They're going to be video explainers. And then I want to integrate into that, some one-on-one sessions that I can book with people, or maybe group classes, reading classes. I have a unique approach. I lean very heavily into modern Greek, and I use modern Greek to teach biblical Greek as a platform, which is very uncommon. Basically, nobody does it. But it's I'm pioneering a new thing here with my Bible study platform. So reach out directly, stephen@crossbible.com. Get on the mailing list, and if you want to support me, I got a button there that just goes right towards all the development costs. I'm working with some amazing programmers, and we're really rethinking the Bible and Bible software, studying the Bible in a digital way from the ground up. So if you want to jump on this bandwagon, get on this movement, reach out and support us.
Real quick, Kip, I think this is an important point because Stephen is literally rarely popping up when it comes to doing these kinds of things, and he's gone out of his way to do this. But like, I want to be a donkey kisser right now, and just be ass kisser for those who
a cold kisser,
a cold kisser. And I want to say how much work Stephen has done, but I want to have it not only from my mouth, because everyone knows I love to brag on the scholars and friends and things like that. But like, Kip, how organized and meticulous and in depth Stephen goes. Like, I just want to brag and thank you, Stephen, for the work you've done helping me so far, and just trying to explore the Bible and the languages and getting into the Greek and asking really, really precise and good questions.
Yep.
But I encourage others to latch on to what you're trying to do and help in any way possible, because this is really fun stuff.
Thank you. Well, and I'm throwing in on the YouTube game, so I'm going to get in on the back and forth. I just don't want to I want to be friendly with everyone. I really don't want toxicity. I want a learning experience, and I want, my platform to be very focused on sort of an unbiased view of the text and the textual tradition, and sort of in early Christianity and early, Second Temple Judaism context. That's really my core interest, and with a strong focus on the language. So hopefully I can sort of coexist with everyone in the ecosystem and not ruffle any feathers. I'm not into flame wars on the internet.
Well, thank you. Trav Matthews, 199. Thank you, Trav. Eric Bess in the hizzy. This is yours, Kip.
Oh, this is mine. Phew. Glad I didn't ask that Allison guy a question. He deserted us all. I don't want anything. I just promised Kip I will watch on his channel. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Eric's a good close friend of ours, and he chose you over me. And
it's
I'm gonna cry about
it was bound to happen. It was bound to happen at some point. So I don't know what to tell you, buddy.
Jason Kakulo, that's on yours as well.
Is it on mine? Oh, yeah. Iao means Jews worshipped a Dionysus derivative. I would say no. It does not mean that. Iao is a transliteration of Yahweh, which is a form of the divine name, the Tetragrammaton Yahweh, that you see already within the Hebrew Bible text. It's also attested in some very early Semitic inscriptions dating back to you see it in the 8th, 9th century, and I believe even in some of the earliest ones. I might get this wrong. You certainly see it back in the 8th, 9th century, but you might even see it earlier in the in as early as the 12th. I might be wrong about that, but it appears that this was a very early form of the name of the divine name. It is not a Dionysus derivative.
I would like to
And
add,
so far as the Hebrew Bible is concerned, or the ancient Israelite religious picture is concerned.
yeah, because I was going to say, like, I think there's a lot more to the picture of how Jews under Hellenism, which is simply imitating and mimicking and finding a way to kind of collab. Oftentimes, Greek authors would say they call her this, but we know her as, and then Athena or whoever the goddess is or god in there. And there's this blend going on. We see in the Maccabees where they're literally making up genealogical traces to the Spartans with Jews. And so this Hellenistic project, they found inscriptions where like Zeus and Yahweh are the same God. So and if you see how Greeks in a lot of their mythic tropes and stuff are actually pulling from Phoenician, ancient Mesopotamian stuff to kind of craft their myths, it's almost like sister religions or sister cultures in a way that are adopting similar motifs. And by Hellenism, some Jews, obviously you just read the Maccabees, you can find, were totally on the project of blending these deities and practices. And I imagine some Jews were really worshiping Yahweh Dionysus in some way. Whereas some were like, we're pushing against this, our national identity, whatever their motivation may be, to go in opposition to what's going on with the Hellenistic project. And we also see that with like the revolts in Rome and things like that. So it's a messy picture, but I could see this being adopted.
Very much so.
Yeah, I could see this being adopted, though, this name, and finding a way to like utilize that in a way to syncretize what's going on in certain Hellenized Jews projects. So just to comment on that as a point, you're saying its origins aren't necessarily at all related in that way, but the project may later have become something like that in certain contexts.
And important to point out that our sources for that later development continue to remain pretty speculative.
I mean, well, we have sources where it's clear that they're calling like Zeus and Yahweh the same. As far as Dionysus, though, I don't know a specific example I can give. I don't know off the top of my head, but like it wouldn't shock me is all I'm saying. Yeah. Sylph. Thank you. Appreciate it. Eric Bess is back again. This is yours, Kip.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for answering my obnoxiously unsolicited questions about Greek over the past couple of years. Appreciate you. More money for Kip. Sweet. Thanks, Eric.
I'm just kidding. Tenacious Art Girl. What's the apologetic response for why no account of Jesus' big parade down Jerusalem Avenue when the city has over 200,000 people, many who can read and write?
Well, I would imagine, if I'm going to put on my apologetics hat here, which doesn't fit as well as it once did, but I would imagine the apologetic response for that is that, I mean, we just don't have a lot of documentation of the period anyways. So it shouldn't be a surprise if it's missing. And then, if there ever was documentation of an event like this, one of the reasons why we don't have a lot of stuff from this particular period in the second temple, the first century, I guess, specifically, is because of the Jewish War. And what that had, the kind of impact that had on the city of Jerusalem would certainly would certainly have created a hole, right, in any sort of written documentation that we would have of this sort of thing. So that's with my apologetic hat on. I don't, whether or not this is something that happened, I don't particularly think it's significant that it's not mentioned anywhere. So
it's kind of odd, though. I mean, it's a good question to ask, even if we don't have sources, because Josephus mentions Judas the Galilean, for example, with cleansing temples and stuff. And why is he not mentioning Jesus with cleansing temples? You know what I mean?
See, and my response to that is that if this is an event that happened, I think that probably just indicates to you, that it was probably a much smaller event
Could be.
than what Josephus has posited. I do know that, and this is not just Christian apologists. I do know that some archaeologists and historians of the region and the period will connect dots between their. If I've remembered this correctly, there is an increase of a Roman presence in Jerusalem, which is quite large, like Roman legions. That specifically takes place right around 34 CE, 34 AD, and I do know that there are archaeologists, Greek historians who will connect that to some of the things that are mentioned in the gospel in terms of the sort of unrest and the tumult that was common at the time.
Interesting. Thank you. Trav Matthews, could Arimathea be Ramathaim Zophim transliterated into Greek? I'm not the language guy.
Ramathaim Zophim.
I mean, there's the argument that it's totally Greek, that it's arimathea, like that it's good learning. That's a Greek derivative. That's the counterpoint to that.
Yeah.
Don't know. Thank you. Nuri Suna, and I'm not going to know this language game here, so you might want to read this here, Kip.
I don't do Arabic either. So the Arabic word for sign is ayah, and the Hebrew equivalent of which is ot. The former can be used to denote an entity's physical body. Can the latter be used similarly or no? I don't know of that being the case offhand. Let me just look it up quickly here, and I can give you an answer. Most of the time, let's see. I don't believe
while you're
so,
doing that, I plugged Stephen's website again for those who are asking. We got a super chat coming about that just ahead of time. Cross Bible. It's simple. Cross.
I hope it doesn't crash.
I know, right? Swap it.
It's new. It's all super new. It's rough. I had to get it out there, people. So we're working on it. We're working hard on it, day in and day out.
But go check them out.
It doesn't. So I'm just looking in here in my lexicon, and it does not appear to function as an indication of a person, at least not in the Hebrew Bible, and not in the in the Dead Sea Scrolls either. I would have to go over there and grab my my rabbinic Hebrew dictionary to check on the later literature.
Thank you for jabbing at that one. Staus 25, Kip, have Josh McDowell or of his associates reach out after your video. Curious about the feedback or damage control.
So I think no, I've heard nothing in response from the McDowell camp directly about it. I do know that that the McDowells were made aware of it, and I believe that they have watched it. I also get the sense that that there is some reluctance on their side just to even make any sort of public acknowledgement of the documentary. I think they're probably mad that I wasn't very nice. And I also didn't I did not consult them beforehand on the content that I was making. So
Bad boy. Bad boy. Oh my gosh, Eric Betts. Derek,
Oh,
you knew I was
there's
going
one
to
for
show
you.
you love. My boy. Thank you all. First time I've caught a live.
By the way, Eric just texted me and said that the last super chat that he sent to my channel was actually specifically for Stephen. Sorry, Stephen.
No, I addressed it. It's fine.
Oh, good. Okay.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it. Question every claim. Wow. Big old super chat. Holy smokes. Great job, Derek. Incredible guests and show. Have a book on me. Thank you for that.
Ooh,
I could use
very
it.
nice.
Just purchased a couple books here, and yeah, thank you for that. Also, subscribe to Kip. You know, we're dual streaming this right now, and subscribe to Stephen. He's got the new Cross Bible website.
I'm curious. I got 13 subscribers and 12 views on my one video. That's the first in a 3-part series. So let's see when we get off. Maybe I can get 100. Maybe, I don't know. Throw me a bone, guys.
Throw him
There
a
you
bone.
go.
Guys and gals. Yeah.
Throw all the bones at Stephen.
Bones. Lost Fan says, what is Stephen's website? I want to sign up.
Crossbible.com. It originally was a tool, I've been working on it for like a decade now, and it was originally Cross Reference Bible, but that's long, and Cross Bible is a little catchier. So yeah, hopefully you
I
can
like that.
remember it. It is built around cross references. So it's aligning the New Testament with the Old Testament, but giving it to you with the option of viewing it in Greek or an English translation of the Greek, because those are that's the way it lines up, as opposed to the good old like NIV. I love it, but all this stuff is just relegated to like footnotes, and I think we as a community of Bible students need to do better, and provide. And I'm aiming to build better digital Bible study resources, because the ones that are out there just are disappointing.
Kip, we have so much that we could say. Stephen, we have so much we could say. And if you want, I guess we should go ahead and start rounding out this live stream together, and like comments, observations, mind changing, where you're at in this, like what you think's going on. Are you convinced at least, or nudging toward Matthew knowing Hebrew at this point based on this conversation? And I'm going to use the restroom real quick if that's cool with you. So
Okay.
Before you go, Derek, can you pull up the third image in the PDF so Kip and I can go over it while you're gone?
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Because I mentioned that there were some things that, even though like totally commend. So that one. I don't know if you can zoom in on it, make it a little bigger.
I can.
Okay.
And I just peed my pants thanks to you guys. I'm just kidding.
So yeah, this was what we were going over, which obviously the slide that Dr. Kip prepared on his stream had the Hebrew integrated. So I didn't integrate the Hebrew into this. I was just focusing on the Greek, because I'm just trying to figure out, okay, if Matthew has a Greek source that is, adjusted and rescinded towards the Proto-Masoretic text. The thing I wanted to clarify was regarding the genders, because everything is like at least the way that Mike Jones phrased his argument was really based on the genders, because they don't match up, right? So what you have in our version of the Greek Septuagint in Zechariah 9:9 is hypozygion, what's the way I say it? Hypozygion for some people.
That's how I say it.
I say hypozygion, but it's neuter, right? So it's not feminine, it's not masculine, it's neuter. So it's neutral. And what Matthew or his source, whoever translated this from the Hebrew, is changing that to onos, which is either masculine or Hebrew. It can go both ways. It just, whatever article you put in front of it is the gender that you've decided to use it as. And he uses it definitively as feminine. So what he's doing here is he's taking a neuter noun and he's making it feminine. He could have easily made it masculine. And I think the argument is, okay, I don't understand the argument, to be honest. If the Hebrew has both animals as masculine, then it doesn't follow that he must be translating from the Hebrew because it's feminine, right? Like the thing is, so the changes here, for the record, is neuter to feminine, hypozygion to onos, and then polos is already masculine, right? So then
Yep.
that's masculine all the way through. So I don't see that change as like a significant indicator that, oh boy, he was not reading the Greek here. He was translating from the Hebrew. And then the only clue that he may have been translating from the Hebrew, or that his source text is a more faithful translation of the Hebrew Masoretic text or Proto-Masoretic text, is this final phrase that I want you to talk about, Kip, again. Yeah, epipolon yon hypozigiou. So now it's like the son or the offspring, the donkey, the son or the offspring of the donkey. So that little noun phrase, son of the donkey, or child of the donkey, that's the thing that's interesting in terms of like addressing the question of whether or not Matthew knew Hebrew or just used a source that was based on the Hebrew.
Yep. I'm just pulling it up here. I'm just pulling it up here in the Hebrew, and it is a translation of Va'al Air ben Atonot, which is literally translated on, basically on a colt, the son of draft animals. And that's the other thing that is happening there, which makes me think that Matthew is not drawing directly from the Hebrew either, is that last word is plural, draft animals, right?
So
which he would then
hypozigion would be plural.
Yes.
Then. Yeah, if he was literally translating from the Greek.
Which isn't happening there. And like, people can go back and look at the stream that I did, the very long stream response that I made to Michael Jones about what's happening in this text. And I keep coming back to a few things which make me think on this question. And so I'll just say this. I have probably moved a little bit in terms of my feelings about who the author Matthew was and his familiarity with, Jewish tradition. I would say early rabbinic tradition. I'm using scare quotes there a lot just because you have to extrapolate backwards from the medieval period into the first century when we're talking about what's going on in the Mishnah and in the Talmuds and the Midrashim. So I am more persuaded now, especially after having spent more time with Dale's commentary and talking to him, that Matthew is undeniably Jewish, and has roots within a strong Jewish community. What that looks like in terms of his familiarity with the Hebrew language and with the Hebrew text of the Bible, I think is a much more difficult question to answer. But on this particular text, on Zechariah 9:9, I don't think that you can make a strong argument on his dependency of a Hebrew text at any stage. And the reason for that is taking the whole thing into consideration. And for me, the fact that Matthew is quoting verbatim from the Septuagint in those is it 2 or 3 stikos there? The Kurase Thugater Jerusalem is directly from the Septuagint. Eduho Basileos Su Erchatai Su, directly out of the Septuagint.
No. I mean, yeah. If you're crossing over with Isaiah 62, then yes, that matches perfectly.
Oh, right, yeah, exactly.
He has a lot of it's hard to imagine that he, just so happened to translate it in a way that aligned perfectly, unless he just knew that text by heart or knew that.
And it's possible too that he's drawing from what he's heard in synagogue. But I think it's just as likely that he's got a Greek version of a Hebrew text that looks closer to, potentially closer, I guess,
Well, and I guess the other
on that
point,
last line.
yeah, and the other point here is the just and salvific he is, right? In Greek, it's sozon.
That's
Uh,
the
yeah, that's
and
what does that sound like in Hebrew?
like it's a so it's it
Passive
looks very
participle,
much
right?
the same, right? Yeah.
But it's
Um
saved in Hebrew and not saving.
yeah.
It's like in save. So
Yeah.
the theory is, if he had the Greek version in front of us that looked like that, and he had that line, and it said saving in the Greek, logically Matthew just would have put that there because Jesus is saving. And so that's another that weighs in the direction of Hebrew, because then it's like, well, maybe he was reading the Hebrew because the Hebrew says saved, and he didn't want to put that Jesus was saved. I don't know. That's my interpretation.
Yeah. And there's complications with the Hebrew there too, because that particular verb only appears in the two declensions in Hebrew, and can what it can be, it makes the translation a little bit more malleable there. But the big one for me is the repetition by Matthew of that word praus, for I believe it's ani in the Hebrew, the word humble. It's a very strange way of translating that word, and when you look through it, it occurs frequently throughout the Hebrew Bible. When you look through all the instances where the Septuagint translates that word, they almost never use praus for that one. There's a different word that they use that I am not
Mhm.
I'm not remembering off the top of my head. But to me, that's kind of that's quite a strong indicator that that he's got a Greek text in front of him, and that he's not translating that out of the Hebrew, because it's strange, it's odd.
Yeah.
Why would you do that? So yeah. So
So
it's
that was as deep as I wanted to get into the weeds of this, because
Yeah,
obviously
yeah. Okay.
we've lost a lot of people out of.
it's all good. It's all good.
No doubt, no doubt. So, the one thing that the one thing that I wish we had a little bit more time to talk about with Dale, which, in my opinion, I keep coming back to this as sort of the critical hinge of this argument, is the fact that Matthew needs to get two donkeys into this story, and the fact that Matthew has Jesus sitting on two donkeys in this story. Like, we can go through, some of the apologetics Stephen mentioned, this idea that Jesus is not sitting on two donkeys, he's sitting on the cloaks.
Right.
Doesn't work from a source critical appraisal of the text, because Matthew is following so closely Mark's version and making these very deliberate changes that we can track, right? Like,
Yeah.
we see exactly where
But
he's
for the
making
record, it's not riding the donkeys. It's not he's going and bouncing
sitting.
onto a donkey.
Yes.
He just sits down and he mounts
Yep.
them.
But
That's
as
the extent of the
Allison,
description.
while we didn't get him to really dwell on it, he did answer the question
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
did bring it up. And he said, Matthew does not have the visuals of what's happening with Jesus and the donkeys in mind. He has the text. He is
Yeah.
thinking in text and not in reality of what is actually occurring. In fact, you could use the argument in Matthew's birth narrative. See, Bart just did a course before it launched public where people could purchase on the Gospel of Matthew. He talks about the star. They follow the star, and it just rests above the place where Jesus is born. And it's like, then what Bart did in the course, which was interesting, highlighting Allison's points, he says, what does this look like? How do we visualize a star? And it's anachronistic to assume what we know what stars are compared to what they would have thought of stars. But how would that have looked? And what was the point? And he goes, it doesn't make any sense in the literal. What had to actually happen? Matthew's goal is not what happened in the literal sense, as in his writing of it. He's not trying to actually give you the vivid, here's what it would look like in a photograph. It's more narrative, it's story. And I'm personally persuaded what Matthew's doing is not only going from the Hebrew scriptures clearly to rewrite Moses, to deal with he's doing a midrash of a lot of this material. But I also think Richard C. Miller has an interesting parallel between the birth of Alexander the Great and where Persian magi come to the birth of this God man, this man who becomes a god. And he's done interesting parallels between that. So birth narratives, I love catching them. Suetonius does this with the Caesars. The list goes on and on. But I just want to highlight, I don't think his goal is, I'm writing something that makes perfect sense and it's just obvious. It's story, you know?
Well, one thing I found interesting is I consulted a few different modern Greek translations of this passage to see, because these are modern Greek translations that are sanctioned by the Greek Orthodox Church. So this is the official position of the Greek Orthodox Church. What is it equally ambiguous when it gets rendered in modern Greek, which is close to the Bible? And these translations were all over the map, but it clearly is their official position that he sat on one donkey. And like in one of the translations, that's normally it follows along the ancient Greek pretty literally and just renders it like line by line. And when it gets to that passage, it's like the disciples couldn't decide which they put the cloaks on one animal and then the other animal because they didn't know on which one Jesus was going to sit. And then he sat on the mother donkey, if I recall. And so it's like they're obviously doing some backflips because they don't like this whole like sitting on two donkeys thing. It is admittedly counterintuitive and weird. Obviously, it creates this tension. Obviously, it spawned this whole series of video discussions. And I just, I share Dr. Allison's sentiment that it's just not that important at the end of the day.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. But so one of the things that I wanted to mention, when I did my stream, when I did my response to Michael, I hadn't had the chance to read this particular essay yet, and it's one that he references with quite a high frequency. It's this it's an article written by Bernard Batto, who is an ancient Near Eastern scholar, and he wrote this little article for a festschrift that was published for a friend of his. It's called Enthroned Upon, let me just grab the exact title here. It's called Enthroned Upon Donkeys, the entry of divine Jesus into Jerusalem according to Matthew. So when this particular article, Michael Jones likes to draw on this one quite a bit in making the point that what Matthew's trying to do in this story is to illustrate Jesus's divinity as enthroned upon two living creatures as he's entering into the city of Jerusalem. And then he kind of conflates that a little bit with, I believe it's Robert Gundry, in discussing this particular passage, suggests that the cloaks over top of the two animals are representative of like a chariot throne, like a divine chariot throne, right? Batto doesn't actually make that particular point. He just says that the placement of these two animals possibly draws on some active ritual imagery that survives from Syria, which is where many scholars think that Matthew was writing from in the first place. But I found this. I'm going to quote this right in the conclusion of his paper here, which I found really interesting. Sorry, I'm going to need to.
It's really an elaborate explanation for the tweaking of a couple of pronouns. Like, to be honest,
it is. It really is.
It's a lot.
But this is
interesting.
This is
It's interesting. Yeah.
The thing about this though is where Batto actually ends up in this article is not a place that I don't think any Christian apologist actually wants to be. So here's what he says. Let me just get my placement right here. So in scene after scene throughout the gospel, the evangelist affirms the divinity of Jesus, continually reminding the reader that Jesus is the Son of God from heaven. Is that the right spot? Or is it over here? Sorry, I should have. I didn't plan on doing this,
No,
but
we're-
and maybe I can. Maybe it might be better for me to just paraphrase this.
Well, I guess for the
Um,
record, the argument's more elaborate than I characterized it, and that should be fair.
A little bit. So I'll just say, yeah, I can't find it specifically within this article, but what Battle basically says is that the way in which Matthew has Jesus sitting on two animals, and he clearly thinks that Jesus is sitting on two animals in his article, right? But then he suggests actually that there's the usage of the preposition that Matthew uses to show Jesus sitting. He continuously translates that as sitting over the donkeys, right?
The
And
two prepositions involved are epi, which is like
epi
on, and
epano,
epano,
right?
which is a
Yeah.
combination of epi-ano, so it's like on top of versus on, which
Yeah.
in English has
Yeah.
no real distinction.
Exactly. So, but for Battle, he seems to think that this is somehow significant of portraying Jesus. If I'm reading Battle correctly, he seems to think this is significant of portraying Jesus, maybe not even like sitting on the donkey so much as sitting above them. So it's almost like a suspended Jesus over the donkeys entering the city of Jerusalem, which is even weirder than
Well,
anything that.
if we're gonna get imaginative here, Kip, let's get a little imaginative for a second. I'm gonna take you a little bit on a little bit of a trail here. There is so much art in antiquity. We can go into way ancient, ancient Near Eastern examples where this stuff is showing up in Egyptian gods with the heads of donkeys. Okay, they are donkey looking. One of them was an evil god, in fact. And David Litwa gets in the Evil Creator, Origins of an Early Christian Idea. He goes in and talks about this donkey, and even we have an inscription of a crucified man donkey with a donkey head that they didn't know what that was, which is actually a mockery of Jesus. But Dionysus himself in stone and on coins and everything is riding donkeys. Demigod heroes. These are divine figures that were men. And I mean, if we want to get a bit speculative, right, we can throw the blanket out there and talk about enthroned demigods riding on donkeys. Okay, cool. Dionysus did this too. But also how there's a polemic against Yahweh, and they believed there's there's Roman and Greek sources that hint at this god in the temple that they don't show everybody is actually a donkey-headed deity. They won't show you. And so like there's this like donkey imagery and donkey stuff happening a lot with Yahweh from its polemical, people who are not fans of Judaism from the Roman and Greek sources. And so I just figured I'd throw a little curveball in there and we could share images if we wanted to just give an example of,
Sure.
Here's a coin, for example, of Dionysus riding on a donkey. There's a visual. He's laying on it. I mean, that's pretty heavy stuff. The other example I wanted to show, and it's better to just do it from Google, and you can go and look this up yourself if you think I'm full of it. Feel free to. I'm all about doing that kind of stuff and having people check it out. But this is the other one, right? This is a 2nd century AD. They borrowed from Jesus. I mean, it's a long stand. Donkeys play a significant mythological trope in so many cultures, but in this region, you'll find it in Egypt. You'll find it in Greek material, Roman, with the Dionysian cults as well. And then here you have Jesus riding on a donkey, which might just be simple. Let's just look at scripture and we can answer our questions that way. Cool. But it might work in light of Gentiles inclusion, especially with the Great Commission, which is geared toward, look, we gave the Jews a chance. You went through the cities of Jerusalem and Israel. You went to the Jew first, and now we're going to the Gentile. You're laying out the red carpet potentially. There's a bit of speculation. How about that? It's imaginative.
It is. And I think the point to be drawn out of this is that so the common apologetic response to reading this text is to use your common sense, right? Use your common sense. That looks stupid. Of course, this isn't what Matthew was thinking, because this looks stupid. I would say that that an appropriate response as a scholar of literature, or as someone who's interested in, the mythology and the literature of the period, is to just say, hold on a minute. Some of this stuff really does look stranger than what we think it should.
Well, because your common sense is modern common sense, and they may not be the same sensibilities.
Exactly.
But the contradiction is that common sense demands, so, according to this argument, common sense demands that he sat on the cloaks that were on one donkey, or they're on two donkeys, but he favored the one.
Yeah.
But I just don't buy it, because again, even if you're reaching for these, like, okay, well, they were on both animals and it was an elevated altar that he was riding. It's like, well, you're still faced with this problem, and common sense can't bail you out of it.
And and when you get to that point, when you're starting to encroach on the territory of Bernard Batto, then it looks even weirder than what you imagined, right? So I know Dale said, I think he said that Matthew created a problem for himself in his rendition,
or he wasn't aware that he created the problem,
or he wasn't aware that he created a problem. Maybe that's it.
That's what
see, and I think when I've discussed this, I think I've said a few times that I just don't think Matthew particularly cared to think about what we would consider a pragmatic, realistic situation, because that's not what he's doing, right? Like, he's not crafting a historical narrative. He's writing theology. What's
ironic, though, is part of this is the fault of, like, English Bible translators, because I was looking for a good English Bible translation to put in that synopsis, so I didn't have to make up my own that would reflect this word order. And to my recollection, none of them did. They all say they put the cloaks on the donkeys and he sat on them. And it's like, so the closest antecedent in English is the donkeys. And so it's only when you go back to the Greek.
The cloaks. You mean the cloaks?
The cloaks.
Well, when you go back to the Greek, the sentence order is shifted, so the cloaks are the closest antecedent, and that's what Jonathan McClatchy and Tim McCrew, like, this is what all these people are reaching for. They say, well, if you look at the Greek, the antecedents are switched, so this is like, this breaks our issue. This solves the problem that the English translations have created by switching the syntax, but the word order is the same in Mark. Like, the closest antecedent is still the cloaks in Mark, and he's sitting on it. So that was what I was trying to point out with this synopsis, that I had to customize, because all the English translations swap the word order because it just sounds better in English, I guess. Because in English, it sounds weird to say he put he put on the donkeys the cloaks and then he sat on them. That is not natural word order in English. So it just doesn't work.
Yep.
Have we made asses out of ourselves yet with these donkeys?
This is the last time, right?
Like, this is the end. No, because we're going to get a 3-hour response to this, right?
Like, probably.
I hope so. I mean, at least one that we found more common ground at.
But for the record, like, I'm totally on the other side on this one. Like, I opened this thing by giving kudos to Michael. So if he's still listening to this, like, let's get on a call, man. Like, I want to talk about this.
I too. So I've had some exchanges with Michael about this idea. It does seem to be it's an unfortunate. I think it's an unfortunate sticking point for a lot of people who have to have the text come together into this alignment, right? We have to make sure that they're all both saying the same thing.
My observation with you,
and that's troubling.
Well, that was the thing. Like, my prickly point wasn't so much, is Matthew aware of Hebrew? honestly, I never really gave a crap if he knew Hebrew or didn't. In fact, based on the conversations with Dell, he sways me with a cumulative case to think he at least has some component of knowledge of Hebrew, even if it is just playing gematria. Like they know letter alphabetic stuff and finding ways to piece something there. That could be the case. He seems to know something here. That never bothered me. And you guys were nerding out on the language and the details here. And that's important to what my goal was to show, is that this is a literary work crafting a significant narrative to the group that identifies as Christian, as followers of this Christ, but that we're not dealing with historical reportage as is. And if we can get more apologists, not just Christians, but like apologists, to start going down the route of, man, I don't have to force this to be, they sat on a cloaks, because that would then contradict the situation between Mark and Matthew, and have it be two donkeys in Matthew. Stephen was, I was actually smiling from ear to ear when I was watching him and Michael Jones, and he was willing to confess that with my comment in the chat, going, it could be that there was no historical two donkeys. And I'm going, I mean, for me, it's like
Stephen Boyce. You mean Stephen Boyce?
Stephen Boyce.
Stephen Boyce.
Yeah. Not you. Like,
because we haven't even addressed the question, like, was there one or was there two? If you had a camcorder back then, what would it be? And the typical argument is that there were always two. There was two in Mark. There's two in, like, Matthew's the only one that mentions the mother. That's the sort of, I believe that's the standard.
I think that's the way it goes.
That's how they would understand it. Yeah.
Because they can't do it the other way around. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, it's like, okay, so they just didn't mention it.
But my problem was saying that, like, okay, the argument that if Matthew was referencing the Greek, that is somehow negative, that's like wrong. Like, we got to push back on that. Right. No, Matthew's translating Hebrew. Like, I don't think that's the case. I think he could have been he could have just been like Philo of Alexandria, like super intelligent, well-trained, in the rabbinical school, just happened to speak Greek as a native language, and you relied on Greek translations because that was what pretty much most of the New Testament authors are doing most of the time. And that is the whole premise of, like, why I built Cross Bible, because I want that Greek text to be front and center in those cross references. And modern, Bible software just doesn't do that. There's an institutional preference for the Hebrew Masoretic text that needs to be kind of like counterbalanced with with exposure to the Septuagint. Because you get that in commentaries. Why can't I get that in my Bible study?
We have a really interesting one that came up. Isn't the most reasonable explanation that Jesus sat on the little donkey, which sat on the big donkey? Yeah. Now we're getting somewhere.
That's the and
there's another reading there for you, right?
And Apologia had that image up, and like this is the whole like it's fun to like laugh about it, but like it really. It's understandable why that drives Mike Jones and everybody on that other side of this crazy, and and they're justified. And my favorite moment was in the last stream when Michael like pulled up the commentary from Allison to point at, like, this is what I'm citing, guys. Like, what more do you want from me? Like I'm doing my homework here. Like, I'm citing my sources.
You got to give him credit.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you did. And Kip, look, Kip, we're always clashing, but look, if we think we're wrong or we're not sure or persuaded by something or even nudged in a direction, sure, we hope that the other side will compromise as well and try to meet somewhere where it seems the evidence points to. I don't think it's a coincidence. And I want your comments on this, that Mike Licona, ended up taking kind of a controversial evangelical stance on Matthew, the end of Matthew, with the saints rising from the graves, and saying, I don't think this is history. I think this is an allegory. He found a different kind of category to put it in, but it didn't happen.
He said special effects or something like that.
Right. And he gets fired from wherever he was working at the time for this. This is a big deal, but I don't want to get lost into that, the whole drama of what it caused, but to find someone like him make a stand like that, even though it cost him so much, and I'm sure it was a struggle, I'm impressed and proud, because I know how difficult it is to let go of the historical reportage. This had to happen, as the text says, kind of model that we in the post-Enlightenment era have to make sense of this stuff. It's anachronistic. And I don't think Christians, maybe they did struggle with it at times, but I don't think that was their biggest thing when they walked away with Matthew. This had to happen exactly as it is. Maybe it was just poetic. Maybe it had a meaning in the story and not so much exact verbatim.
Well, that's just it, right? Like the history of biblical scholarship and then the reactions to it are really just a reflection of the history of the Enlightenment and like the scientific revolution, where modern critical biblical scholarship was born out of this strong commitment to naturalism. And the ironic thing about this is that so this this happened in the in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. By the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, you start to get some pushback from what came to be known as the fundamentalists, who drew their name from the publication of a series of books or pamphlets called The Fundamentals. These are a series of articles that were written by pastors and scholars attempting to counter this rapidly expanding program of historical critical scholarship that had developed over the last 150 years, right? The amazing thing about it is that it's now going in another direction, where instead of returning to a pre-critical period and insisting on, well, we follow these traditional approaches to reading and interpreting the text that emphasize the allegorical and the symbolic, as well as the historical kernels in there. No, we're going to ditch all that and invent a new program of reading the Bible that promotes naturalism and historicity as best as we can understand it. At the heart of it, fundamentalism, these ideas about quote unquote taking the Bible seriously, reading the text plainly, understanding everything that's in there as something that had to have happened, is very much a naturalistic program, right? It's centered on this idea that we somehow prioritize history over everything else in our attempts to ascertain meaning. And I, like, as an historical critical scholar, I'm keenly interested in history, right? That's a big part of my whole project when it comes to reading and interpreting the Bible. But part of my recognition, part of that though, is recognizing that in antiquity, there was not this drive towards, these camera ready copies of real events or real, quote unquote, real life in the same sense that we understand it today. So,
well, the genres just weren't defined then. They were starting to get defined, but there were still deviations.
Yeah, for sure.
So
I love it. Any final words from you, gentlemen?
No, I'm good. It's fun to hang out with you guys on a Thursday afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me, and I think I got like 10 subscribers since we started. So
awesome!
Yeah,
that's
you
awesome.
will get more, and I do want to just, of course, announce tomorrow. Stay tuned. Kip is streaming. I am streaming. Yeah. We are dealing with slavery in the Bible again. I guess again, things keep. It's almost like they keep being said.
Listen, it's frustrating. Just because after 2, 3, 4, 5 years on this platform, it feels like we continue to retread the same ground and people continue to make the same bad arguments about biblical slavery. And the thing I think I get most frustrated by is the fact that our good friend Dr. Joshua Bowen has now written and revised and massively updated, an excellent, accessible book on the topic of biblical slavery, which I think, like, you know, and this is, yeah, it's not a peer-reviewed text, but it's a serious text that is being read and grappled with by actual scholars, right? And for some reason, Josh's work, important work on this topic, just continues to be ignored by Christian apologists. And I'm quite frankly fed up with it. I'm getting frustrated at the fact that that we have to keep retreading the same ground. So here we are again.
Yeah. Well,
We'll be back tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll have plenty to say tomorrow about that. I hope people will go to crossbible.com, subscribe to Kip, obviously subscribe to Myth Vision. We're a family here trying to, you know, keep educating and bringing this stuff to you. And we did have a few super chats before we go. Lost Fan asked, Derek, did you already answer this burning question? We all need to know, and only you can resolve this issue. Are we or are we not Myth Vision?
We are Myth Vision, right? I think that's what you always say.
We are Myth Vision. Yes. Another one, get Jay Smith on to talk about changes to Quran. I take a deep breath because it's like I could go to academics who I don't think are polemicists against Islam to do that. He might bring some valuable insights and maybe write about a lot of stuff, but it's like me going and getting David Wood to collab on you know, Islam. And I see him do so many things with his own religion in a hypocritical way that also apply to Christianity, to Islam. So it's like, I emailed him a long time ago and he never responded. So Jay Smith may know who I am, but I have not tried again. And I'm not so sure I'd even be interested when I have actual like PhDs in the field of early Islam, Quranic studies. They know the Arabic inside and out, can speak it, read it fluently and all that. I don't see the point. Stop Scamming Man says, some say the women wouldn't have anointed a several-day-old corpse in the culture. Maybe, but there was seemingly some variety on this. 2 Kings 13 has Elisha's remains doing miracles when touched.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't want to leave anyone hanging.
But again, I think I don't think we have to. Yeah, it's not. It's probably not several days in the Gospels.
Thank you. All right. Well, have a nice day, everybody.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, kid. Have a good one.